They say walls can remember. If that's true, then the walls of Saddam Hussein's torture rooms are soaked in memories too dark to recount, too heavy to carry. Behind rusted steel doors, beneath the choking stench of fear, men and women vanished into silence. Some never returned. Others stumbled out as shadows of who they once were. But how did these hidden chambers, rooms of unimaginable cruelty, become the backbone of a regime that ruled through terror? And what did the world find when those doors were finally forced open? Stay with me until the end of this video, because the truth buried in Saddam's torture rooms is more horrifying and more revealing than most history books dare to admit. To understand the torture rooms, we need to understand the man who built them. Saddam Hussein wasn't simply a dictator, he was paranoia personified. Rising through the ranks of Iraq's Ba'ath Party in the 1970s, he learned that power was not taken once, but kept daily, through a relentless performance of fear. When he became president in 1979, his message was clear. Loyalty was life, disobedience was death. And in between those absolutes lay a fate worse than death, captivity in his torture chambers. Here's the chilling truth. Saddam's Iraq wasn't just a dictatorship. It was a surveillance state where neighbors spied on neighbors, children were taught to idolize him, and dissenters disappeared in the night. Those torture rooms weren't hidden mistakes. They were deliberate instruments of rule, as essential to Saddam's power as his army, his oil, and his propaganda. But what exactly happened inside those rooms? Picture stepping through a narrow steel door into a place where every object has been stripped of innocence, redesigned with one purpose only: to inflict pain. The air is thick, stale, carrying the metallic tang of blood that never seemed to wash away. Dim light bulbs swung from the ceiling, not bright enough to reveal everything, but just enough to show shadows that danced like phantoms across the walls. The concrete was not just gray, it was scarred, scorched, and forever stained with the evidence of what had been done there. Chains dangled from the ceiling like grotesque ornaments, rattling softly when the wind crept through the cracks. They weren't built to restrain prisoners, but to suspend them in twisted positions until joints tore and bones popped. Against one wall stood a crude electric chair, its leather straps still stiff with the memory of countless victims. It wasn't science, it was sadism wired to a generator. A current designed to jolt through flesh until screams drowned out thought. Hooks jutted from the walls, cold steel sharpened to tear through skin, muscle, and bone. They were not tools, they were trophies of cruelty, reminders that the human body could be turned into an instrument of suffering. Acid drums sat in corners like silent predators. Prisoners were sometimes lowered into them slowly, their flesh dissolving while they were still alive. But it wasn't only physical mutilation. There were boxes the size of coffins where men and women were stuffed, unable to stand, sit, or breathe freely. Some were forced into rooms filled with rats, snakes, or insects. Others endured water torture, forced drowning sessions where lungs filled until they hovered on the edge of death, only to be dragged back into agony again. And the worst? Children were sometimes brought into these rooms, not always to be tortured, but to watch, to see their parents broken, humiliated, destroyed. That kind of cruelty didn't just scar a body, it hollowed out a soul. These weren't accidents of war. They were theaters of horror, carefully constructed to remind every Iraqi citizen that no one, no matter how ordinary, was safe. Fear was not confined to one place. It was everywhere. Imagine being dragged into a room blindfolded, stripped of dignity, before being stripped of clothes and tied down to cold metal restraints. The first sound you hear is not the crack of a whip, but the voice of your captor leaning close. Do you know why you're here? The question is a trap, because the answer never mattered. The first blow might come from a cable, its rubber sheath designed to tear skin without killing too quickly. Victims were lashed until flesh split open, until backs and legs became canvases of raw agony. When the beatings paused, they were replaced by electric shocks. Wires clamped to tongues, genitals, and eyelids, sending violent currents through the most sensitive nerves of the body. Others faced slower, more methodical cruelty. Fingernails and toenails were pulled out one by one, a ritual of pain stretched across hours. Bones were shattered, not in frenzied rage, but with chilling precision. A calculated snap here, a deliberate crush there. Yet Saddam's men knew that the mind could be broken more thoroughly than the body. Prisoners were blindfolded and lined up against walls, the click of rifles staged for mock executions. They would be convinced death was seconds away, only to be dragged back into their cells, forced to wait for the terror to begin again. Families, too, were made into weapons. A husband might be beaten while his wife was forced to watch. A mother might hear her child screaming in the next room, never knowing if it was real or staged. The psychological torment gnawed deeper than wounds ever could, because it fed on love and fear. There were even rooms designed for silence, cells where prisoners were locked away in total darkness for days, left alone with the echo of their own screams. Starvation, sleep deprivation, and sensory assault blurred reality until prisoners confessed to crimes they hadn't committed or simply begged for death as a release. Saddam's men had mastered something more terrifying than pain. They had weaponized fear itself, proving that a body could be rebuilt, but a broken soul rarely recovers. The answer is both. The first to suffer were political dissidents, intellectuals, opposition members, rival party officials. But soon, the circle widened. Kurds demanding autonomy were dragged into the chambers. Shia Muslims accused of disloyalty faced unspeakable fates. Journalists who dared question the regime were silenced forever. Even ordinary Iraqis weren't safe. A whispered insult, a careless joke, or a neighbor's false accusation could land someone inside those blood-stained walls. And here's the cruelest part. No one was untouchable. Even Saddam's own family members, his ministers, his generals. If he suspected betrayal, the torture rooms opened their doors. But who carried out this brutality? Who enforced this system of pain? Enter the Mukhabarat, Saddam Hussein's infamous intelligence service. In Iraq, the very mention of their name was enough to freeze conversations mid-sentence. Parents taught their children never to repeat anything said at home because one careless word could summon the Mukhabarat to their door. Their power was not just in what they did, it was in what people believed they could do. Fear itself became their greatest weapon. But who were they? These were not crude thugs acting out of rage. They were professionals of cruelty, men trained to turn pain into policy, to transform violence into a precise tool of control. Many had studied torture methods abroad, borrowing from the darkest manuals of human history. They returned to Iraq as artisans of agony, creating new techniques as if designing instruments in some twisted laboratory. The Mukhabarat didn't torture merely to extract confessions. That was too simple, too narrow. Their true goal was annihilation of the human spirit. They wanted resistance to evaporate before it was even imagined. Victims weren't just punished, they were remade into warnings. When a prisoner was returned to their family, broken, maimed, or silenced, the entire community absorbed the message. Defiance is death. Obedience is survival. Their presence was everywhere. In universities, informants reported whispers. In mosques, ears listened for stray sermons. In crowded markets, plainclothes officers blended in with merchants. Iraqis learned to live with suspicion in their bones, never sure if the man beside them was friend or state predator. And all of them, every officer, every interrogator, every torturer answered to one man alone, Saddam Hussein. He was the architect, they were the builders, and the torture rooms were their monuments. Yet even in this machinery of terror, some victims survived. Scarred, hollow-eyed, and forever haunted, they emerged to tell their stories. Stories so horrific they read like nightmares, but they were all too real. And if the survivors' testimonies were nightmarish, then what the world discovered after Saddam's fall would prove even darker. Before I take you into the haunting testimonies of survivors, take a moment to support this channel. If you're fascinated and disturbed by these hidden histories of power, cruelty, and deceit, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss the next story that history tried to bury. Now, let's hear from those who endured the unendurable. The walls of Saddam's torture rooms echo not with statistics, but with human voices, broken, trembling, unforgettable. Survivors stepped back into daylight, carrying stories that sound like hallucinations, yet they were horrifyingly real. One man remembered being tied to a spinning ceiling fan. His body swung in circles while guards beat him until his bones cracked. Another was forced into a wooden box so small he could neither stand nor sit, left for days in what he called a living coffin. The cruelty was not improvisation. It was ritual. In a testimony given to the Sunday Times in 2003, a prisoner described being thrown into a cell barely a meter wide, its walls painted blood red, the floor littered with tiny stones. The guards told him to count them. No matter what number he said, the answer was wrong. If he said 2,000, they told him it was 2001 and beat him 10 times. Another day, they forced him to run in circles for 9 hours before throwing him onto the scorching pavement, where a guard sat on his chest until he could not breathe. They dragged him by his ankles until his back streamed with blood. He recalled another torture, grotesque in its mockery, a bicycle crudely drawn on a wall. He was ordered to ride it or be beaten. They pushed him into filthy, stinking water, jabbing him with sticks as he choked, forcing him to drink. On some nights, he was told to catch 10 flies, and by day, 10 mosquitoes, or face punishment. It was impossible. He tried catching them at night and saving them until morning, but it didn't matter. They asked which were male and which were female, and whatever answer he gave, it was always declared wrong. Some horrors went further. A doctor from Basra told the New York Times that after refusing to confess, interrogators brought in his 3-month-old daughter. Before his eyes, they gouged out her eye, then smashed her skull against a wall. That was Saddam's cruelty. It did not stop at the prisoner. It consumed families. Even athletes, the supposed pride of Iraq, were not spared. Laith Hussein, captain of Iraq's national soccer team, recalled being jailed a dozen times for failing to meet Uday Hussein's impossible expectations. Miss a goal, stumble on the field, and the punishment was imprisonment, or worse. Each story is a shard of a shattered mirror, reflecting a larger truth. Saddam's torture rooms were never about secrets. They were about despair, designed to extinguish the final spark of hope in a nation held hostage. By the 1980s, whispers of Saddam's atrocities had reached the West. Human rights reports spoke of mass executions, mutilations, torture devices too cruel to imagine. And yet, many governments turned a blind eye. Why? Because Saddam had something the world wanted: oil. He was also seen as a counterweight to Iran, America's enemy after the 1979 revolution. For years, global powers tolerated his brutality for the sake of political convenience. In this silence, Saddam thrived. He built more chambers, he filled them with more screams, and the world looked away. But history has a way of forcing silence to shatter. And when Saddam finally fell, the doors of those hidden rooms were thrown open for all to see. In 2003, when US-led forces toppled Saddam's regime, Iraqi citizens stormed abandoned government buildings. What they found inside stunned even the most hardened soldiers. Rooms filled with shackles, bloodstains baked into concrete, mutilation devices left behind in a hurry, videotapes cataloging torture sessions, and mass graves nearby, silent witnesses to those who never walked out. For many Iraqis, these discoveries weren't revelations. They were confirmations. The nightmares whispered in private had been true all along. Now, the entire world could see the evidence. But here's the final, unsettling question. What is the legacy of these horrors? Saddam Hussein is gone, but his torture rooms still haunt Iraq. Some remain standing, silent ruins of cruelty. Others have been demolished, as though bricks and mortar could erase memory. But survivors carry the scars, both visible and invisible. These chambers were more than tools of pain. They were symbols of what happens when power goes unchecked, when fear becomes governance, when silence is mistaken for safety. And perhaps that's the most chilling truth of all. Saddam's torture rooms were not accidents of history. They were warnings, etched in blood and stone, of how far humanity can fall when cruelty is given the power of the state. If you've stayed with me through this journey into Saddam Hussein's hidden horrors, take a moment now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. And if you want to keep exploring the shadows of history, stories of betrayal, murder, and scandal. Click on the next video waiting for you on screen. History is darker than you think.